Today we're doing section 1.8 day 1 and we're going to be discussing the inverse function. So the way we indicate we have the inverse is the function notation, but we just put a little -1, so that indicates you have the inverse function. To determine if two functions are the inverse of one another, if you find f of g of x and you get 0, and you do g of f of x, and you also get 0, then you can determine that the two are inverses. Okay, so then the two functions are the inverse of each other. So, there we go, so the inverse of each other. So for our first example, they want you to determine or verify that the two are inverses of one another. So we're going to find f of g of x first. So if I find f of g of x, I have the f function, I have the g function that I'm replacing, and now I'm plugging that into the f function. So I have 3 times this quantity of x minus 2 over 3 plus 2. When I multiply, those 3's are going to be canceling. So I'm going to be left with the quantity of x minus 2 with a plus 2 on the outside, and therefore it is equal to x. And I just realized I fudged up here, so we're going to go back up here. This should not be 0. This should both be x. My apologies. So if you find the inverses of one another, they have to equal x, not 0. All right, so now we're good to go on the first one. Now I have to do the second one. So I have g of f of x. So I have g of 3x plus 2. And I'm going to plug that into the g function. So I have 3x plus 2 in the numerator, minus 2, all over 3. So the 2's are going to be canceling. So nothing's in front of that parenthesis, so I'm essentially dropping the parenthesis. The 2's are gone. I'm left with 3x over 3. The 3's cancel, and I'm left with x. Therefore, we can determine the two are the inverse of one another. So let's discuss how you know how to find the inverse if you're only given one equation. All right, to find the inverse, step 1 is to replace f of x with y. Step 2, switch x and y. Step 3, solve for y. And step 4, replace y with f -1 of x, which means the inverse of x. All right, so let's try 4 examples real quick. So for letter A, we would start by saying y equals 7x minus 5. We switch x and y. So notice you leave the notation or the general part of the function the same. Now we solve for y. So I'm going to add 5 over. So I have x plus 5 equals 7y. And we're going to divide by 7. Therefore, our inverse of x, or of f, sorry, equals x plus 5 over 7. So letter B, we have y equals 5x plus 8. Switch x and y, so I have x equals 5y plus 8. We're going to subtract 8 from both sides. So I have x minus 8 equals 5y. I don't know why I wrote 5 there. Divide by 5, divide by 5. So for this one, the inverse of f equals x minus 8 over 5. And obviously you can fit that on your paper in a better spot. I just ran out of room. Letter C, I have y equals x cubed plus 1. So I have x equals y cubed plus 1. We'll subtract 1 from both sides, so x minus 1 equals y cubed. And the opposite of cubing something would be introducing the cube root. So for our final answer for this inverse, I have the inverse of f equals the cube root of x minus 1. And lastly, letter D. I'm just going to skip right to the step of writing it, and I'm fine with you doing that as well, as long as you know that you switch x and y. So I'm subtracting 4. So I have x minus 4 equals 5 over y. This one we're going to have to multiply both sides by y to clear the fraction. So we're going to times by y times by y. So then I'm going to have yx minus 4y. Actually, let's not distribute it. I changed my mind. We're going to leave that out. So we're going to have y times the quantity of x minus 4 equals 5. And the reason we're going to keep it out, my objective is to solve for y. So if I distribute the y in, I have y in 2 spots. Let me come up here for the sake of room. Your next step would to be divide both sides by the x minus 4. So my inverse of f is going to be 5 over x minus 4. Okay, so you have to divide both sides by this x minus 4. And that would be the inverse of our f function. So this is the conclusion of chapter 1. So we'll go over this material tomorrow, and then we'll be set up to have a test shortly.